Mr. Speaker, my district has been hit by wildfires that constitute the greatest fire in terms of total damage, property damage, in the history of America. And there are those who say that California should not get aid unless we change, get this, our voter registration laws. Now, different states have different voter registration processes, and they're all wonderful, and they tend to work pretty well. And I disagree with some of them. But why condition aid? I have been on this floor time and again and voted for aid to Louisiana when they're hit with horrific hurricanes. And I never once said, no, let's turn to hurricane victims and tell them to keep sleeping on their cousin's couch for months and years until Louisiana changes its abortion laws. Now, I disagree with Louisiana's abortion laws. A woman ought to have a right to choose. I believe that strongly, but it never occurred to me to turn to individual families and deny them the aid they need to overcome a giant disaster and to hold them hostage in an effort to get their state legislators to change their statutes. And I hope this House will not do the same to California. Then we're told that the fires in the Palisades relate to California's statewide water management system. This is absolutely absurd. In Los Angeles County, our reservoirs are full to overflowing. We had plenty of water to live our lives, and even in the middle of the fires, no Los Angelino was told, take a short shower or don't water your plants outside. We have debates on how to use water in California, but it had nothing to do. Well, why were fire hydrants dry in my district? Because we have the Palisades, which go up quite steeply. The water system brings that water in at the bottom of the Palisades at sea level. And then you have to pump the water up. And we have a good system to pump the water, a system quite capable of making sure everybody in the Palisades could live their lives, water their plants, and we could fight 5 house fires all at the same time. And then we were hit not with 5, but with 500 house fires at the same time. From winds at an unimaginable level, hurling cinders, flaming cinders as large as a golf ball, in some cases as large as a baseball, hundreds of yards. And we did not have a water pumping system capable of bringing our fully sufficient water to where it was needed up in the Palisades. Now, if the president said, I'm going to build you the fastest water pumping system in the history of America to make sure that you can bring that water up the hill, fine. Instead, what does he do? He has this ridiculous photo op where he releases millions and millions of gallons of water in January, water that not a drop has reached LA County. The water released, that's irrigation water released at the wrong time in January, that flows into basically a dry lake bed where it's evaporating. We wasted enormous amounts of water. Thank God we stepped in and the local officials prevented it from getting worse. And that's why not a single Republican member from California will come here and say anything good about that ridiculous photo op where Donald Trump forces the federal government to waste water in California that could have been used, would have been used in spring and summer to grow crops for America. But talk about bad management. Trump froze the money across all the federal government. He had to tell people that at least he didn't freeze their Social Security checks, although our local health system clinics aren't getting money. What else did he freeze? Community wildfire defense grants. He came to my district. He showed sympathy for the victims. But we also needed him there to inspire the FEMA workers those victims rely on, that are working 12-hour shifts in some cases to bring people the help they need. But what does he do to the FEMA workers? First, he insults them, and then he injures FEMA. How does he insult? He declares he wants all the FEMA workers and that he wants to abolish FEMA. Great thing to say right in the middle of the most intense part of the disaster recovery effort. But then he turns to FEMA workers and says he'll give them 8 months' pay if they'll just quit. In the middle of the disaster recovery period. Right when we need them, he wants them to quit, and he's going to pay them to quit. And he applies this not only to FEMA workers working in a disaster recovery area, both in North Carolina and in California, but he applies this to temporary workers. FEMA has probably more temporary workers per capita than any other government agency because there are disasters. They hire local people. Now, if you were only going to have a job for 6 months, you can announce that you're giving up the job and get paid for 7 or 8 months and do no work. Obviously, this will impair FEMA's ability to help the people in my district. What will also be a problem is if EPA workers who are the specialists in toxic removal, dealing with a fire that has caused more Teslas and other electric cars to go up in smoke than any other fire in the history of the world, creating a toxic problem that only a few people know how to deal with, is offering them a buyout, telling them to quit and stay home. This effort to insult and then injure is also applied to my state. We had Judiciary Committee hearings, the whole purpose of which was to incite California, not just for fun, although some members had fun, but to injure California by creating a political environment that says we're not going to help people recover from this disaster because they're Californians and we hate Californians. Not a good thing to do when we're down, when we're trying to come up from this disaster. And I should point out that this disaster affected not only my district, but there was also the Altadena-Pasadena fire in Judy's Choose district, and I hope this Congress provides the help that is always provided to the victims of enormous disasters. Similar problem we have is with the CIA, where intelligence officers have been offered a buyout. Well, who's going to take the buyout? The best and the brightest, who can make at least as much money and probably a lot more in the private sector. You lose your best people. And those in the last year of their service, when we need them to pass on their knowledge, they're going to show us that they know that they don't have to work and they can still get the money thanks to Donald Trump. So what does it take to replace these workers? These intelligence officers? Well, first you have to put them through the security clearance. That can take a year. Then they have to learn foreign languages. Then they have to learn their craft. So who benefits from this? Our enemies, the terrorists, China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. And finally, it impairs the ability of the CIA to carry on operations that could undercut the support of the Ayatollahs and hopefully bring regime change and democracy to Iran. Because the only way to be absolutely sure that you don't have a nuclear Iran is to have a nuclear Islamic Republic of Iran, is not to have an Islamic Republic of Iran. But we see this not only at the CIA, but at the FBI, where 8 of the top people have been shown the door, where 5,000 are under investigation for what? For working the files they were assigned, which they are required to do. Now, I wasn't surprised when President Trump eliminated all future investigations of those who came to this floor and imperiled our democracy and imperiled the lives of many of us and our colleagues. But it does surprise me that just because an FBI special agent was assigned a file, they're now under investigation, and it looks like they might quit, that they might get fired, and they're being encouraged to quit, and they get 8 months, or they could stick around and see whether Trump fires them. That free vacation is looking better and better. And how big is this? 5,000 out of the 37,000 employees of the FBI. But the FBI only has 14,000 special agents. Many, perhaps, I believe most of those 5,000 are among those agents, those less than 14,000 agents. If you decapitate the FBI, Americans will die. Mark my words, if you decimate the FBI, Americans will die. If you dismantle the FBI, Americans will die. They will die from the drugs and the gangs, and they will die from the terrorism. This attack on the FBI is an attack on the safety of all Americans. And another attack that doesn't seem like it's an attack on Americans, but really is the decimation of USAID. Now, I would expect Donald Trump, and I would applaud Donald Trump, if he was talking about reforming, reevaluating, reprioritizing USAID. But instead, it seems that he is focused on dismantling USAID. Now, it's not like nobody thinks that's a good idea. Just today, Vladimir Putin applauded President Trump for decimating and in effect calling for the abolition of USAID. Now, Vladimir Putin doesn't care about the Constitution of the United States. We should. Under that Constitution, this Congress passed into the law of the land statutes providing for USAID to operate. And then we passed statutes saying that for this or that operation, this or that amount of money should be spent. Laws of the land creating the programs, laws of the land indicating how much money should be spent on those programs. Those are laws. They're being shredded by King Donald I. So, who benefits from this? Well, 3 beneficiaries: China, disease, and mass migration. Let's first look at China. First, the Chinese are smart enough not to compliment Donald Trump for destroying USAID because they see an opportunity, particularly in the islands of the Pacific, islands my father risked his life for during World War II. They see in these Pacific islands small countries where just a little bit of aid can go a long way for the very few people who live there. These are strategic islands, as we learned in the 1940s. And so China sees us abandoning the world, and they come in a position to grow in world influence. And how much money are we spending here? If you look at the polling, Americans say, well, our foreign aid budget must be 25% of our federal budget, and it should be lower. It should be down to 10% of our federal budget. Our foreign aid budget is less than 1% of our federal budget. No one concerned with foreign aid has dreamt of it being 10%. It's less than 1% of our federal budget. It's less than 1/4% of our GDP. And for that, we can vie with China for influence. But there's more. There's health. A lot of USAID money is spent to deal with malaria, HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, Ebola, and bird flu. So, if you have no morality, if you do not care whether the world's most powerful economic engine does anything to help the poorest of the poor in the world, you might at least take a look at the health effects. Because every time one of these communicable diseases flourishes abroad, it can come here. We saw that with HIV/AIDS. We fear that with Ebola. And every single person who gets HIV/AIDS, every single person with tuberculosis, gives the disease another little laboratory in which it might mutate and become more difficult for us to control when it does come here. So we're talking about spending money for team human versus team virus and team pathogen. How much will it cost for us to treat people if there's a new disease, a drug-resistant strain of tuberculosis, or a drug-resistant or more communicable version of HIV/AIDS? And then finally, we're all focused on the price of eggs. We're all paying an extra 50 cents for every egg at Waffle House. Bird flu is combated by USAID around the world, and every chicken that gets bird flu in a very poor country is a chance for that flu to mutate and come to the United States in strengthened form. So if you're concerned about the health of Americans and the price we pay for our groceries, USAID's efforts to control disease should matter to you. And finally, when people are faced with the worst catastrophes, with drought, with war, with famine, those are the people most likely to engage in mass migration. So even if you have no morality, even if you do not want to help the least of these with even 1/4% of the American GDP, do not take action, Mr. President, that expands the power of the Chinese Communist Party, expands the opportunity for disease around the world, and creates mass migration that will not be stopped by the wall you didn't build. Then we're told lies about USAID. We're told that $50 million was spent for condoms in Gaza. Then the president himself said $100 million. How about not one penny? Complete lie. Now, that doesn't mean we haven't spent some money in Gaza. We did provide for field hospitals in Gaza. People were dying in Gaza. We provided help. And you can argue about what our policy in Gaza should be, but not one condom. You know, there was another lie he told. That wasn't a lie. It was actually the truth. He said we spent $6 million on tourism for Egypt. It wasn't exactly on tourism, but it related to transportation. Mostly true. Except it was a program that Donald Trump established in his first term. He's saying abolish USAID because of what he did in his first term. But while we're talking about lying about how money is spent, let's focus on another lie. They told the lie that USAID had spent $8 million on subscriptions to Politico Pro, a publication. No, the entire executive branch spent $8 million. Okay, is this a woke publication? A waste of money? A subsidy for left-wing journalism and activism? Well, maybe. But Republicans in the House of Representatives last year in all their various congressional offices, just in the House, I'm not even including the Senate, spent $800,000 in subscriptions to Politico Pro, making individual decisions in over 200 offices. They decided that the subscription was necessary to run their office. And you know what? Politico Pro has a competitor, provides much of the same kinds of research, Bloomberg Government, and Republicans in the House of Representatives spent another $800,000 in 1 year. So that seems like a lot of money, especially when you realize that the executive branch is a lot bigger than Congress. If you want to visualize it, the Republicans in Congress who spent $800,000 on Politico Pro have their offices in 1.5 office buildings. Now close your eyes and think of how many office buildings the U.S. government occupies. Well, why do congressional offices and other policy-making offices spend money on these publications? Because it's a lot more efficient to get an analysis that is published and footnoted by experts than it is to hire fine staff, and I have some here, to do the separate research for every entity and every office and every congressional office. And that is a decision each member of Congress makes when they decide whether to subscribe to Bloomberg Government, Politico Pro. And that is also a decision that every doctor and medical researcher makes when they decide whether to subscribe to expensive medical journals. The fact is, it's cheaper to read an article that's specialized and detailed and more expensive than your general purpose articles. This is not a newspaper with events in my city. This is not a huge mass market publication. It is cheaper to subscribe to a specialty journal than it is to hire hundreds of people to do your own research. And that is why members of Congress subscribe to Politico Pro and spend $800,000 on it. And yet the President of the United States first lies and says it was $8 million for USAID, and then lies and says, it's some sort of subsidy to some woke, liberal activist publication. I know my colleagues well. I know my Republican colleagues well. Very few of them are interested in subsidizing woke journalism. Now, let's focus a little bit about the President's discussion of Gaza. Apparently, he wants to buy Greenland, and he's looking for a source of funds to buy Greenland. And he thinks he can do it by selling timeshare condos in Gaza. I don't often provide investment advice. I certainly did back when I worked in the private sector. Don't invest in timeshares in Gaza. Not a good idea. That this idea that 2 million people should be moved from Gaza, and it's two contradictory ideas. Secretary of State Rubio says that these people are going to move out temporarily, and then they can move back in. And apparently a U.S. president who doesn't want to spend a dime on USAID wants to build fancy condos for every resident of Gaza. So Rubio talks about people of Gaza are going to move out, and then they're going to move back in to beautiful condos. But President Trump has said the opposite. He says they're not going back. He doesn't. Instead, he believes that some country in the world is supposed to take in 2 million people from Gaza, and so far he's identified 0.0 countries willing to take 0.0 Gazans in. And he certainly hasn't volunteered that the United States would take them in. And then second, he's got to persuade Gazans to leave, and they don't want to leave. Although I guess if you offered them, a luxury suite at Mar-a-Lago, they'd certainly consider it. So what has he done with this proposal? First, he's embarrassed America. It's absolutely silly. But second, he has changed the political makeup inside Israel to empower those who believe that the Israeli settlers should move into Gaza and partially displace the Gazan population. We need a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. We need the destruction of Hamas. I welcome the recent comments of Israel where they recognize that the Hamas fighters are not going to surrender for Israeli prisons, and have said that it's acceptable if the Hamas fighters depart the region. We saw that in 1982 or 1983 when so many terrorists departed Lebanon for Tunis. So We can see a situation in which the people of Gaza, without Hamas, are able to live in peace. It's not going to be easy. I'm not predicting that it's going to happen, but that is certainly our goal. Mr. Speaker, let me focus on one other issue, and that is an issue mentioned by the prior speaker from Arizona: artificial intelligence. Trillions of dollars are being spent around the world, more in the United States than anywhere else, to make artificial intelligence more powerful. And basically not a penny is being spent to make sure that as we make it more powerful, that we are monitoring for or preventing self-awareness, ambition, and a desire to take control. And then we are told, well, my God, if we were to spend a penny worried about controlling AI, the Chinese are going to be ahead of us in developing AI. We can't afford a single penny on anything other than making AI more powerful. Well, if AI is self-aware, if AI does have develops a survival instinct, AI will be able to understand many things, but they may not understand, even AI may not understand why the human race developed its own successor, a level of intelligence that is transhuman. You know, the last time there was a new level of intelligence on this planet is when our ancestors said hello to Cro-Magnon, and then we said goodbye to Cro-Magnon. Oh, excuse me, to Neanderthal. We were the Cro-Magnon. So let me repeat that. The last time there was a new level of intelligence on this planet is when our ancestors said hello to Neanderthal, and then we said goodbye to Neanderthal. So if you're going to develop a new level of intelligence, perhaps it would be intelligent if we were to spend 1%, 0.5%, making sure that AI is a tool of human beings and not a creature with its own objectives. Yet so far, not one penny. So I look forward to working, I hope, with colleagues on both sides of the aisle to make sure that as we make AI more powerful, we make sure that we keep AI under control. With that,